Jaworski. I am chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. It is 6:02 p.m. and I'm calling this meeting to order. I am participating from my home here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Welcome to the September 13th, 2020 electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We will conduct this meeting similar to in-person meetings. Commissioners, during the roll call, please indicate your current location. During the meeting, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Also mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, one at the beginning and one at the end of the meeting, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter the meeting ID number 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda on the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16 and AT&T channel 99, as well as online at a2gov.org/watchctn. Missy, would you be able to read the land acknowledgement?
Absolutely, Chair Mirsky. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you very much. And would you please conduct the roll call?
Absolutely. Just a reminder, if commissioners could follow Chair Mirsky's very excellent example, which we'll do again, and state where you're calling from, that would be great. Chair Mirsky.
Present. Calling from Ann Arbor.
Vice Chair Colvin Garcia.
Present. Calling from Ann Arbor.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. We've got a panelist in the waiting room. Thank you very much. Commissioner McComber.
Present and joining from my home in Ann Arbor.
Great. Commissioner Levin.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner McCoy.
Here and in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kerber.
I'm here and in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Smith, I believe absent. Commissioner Overpeck, absent. Commissioner Conan.
Present and calling from Ann Arbor.
Great. Commissioner Zittelman.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Chair Mirsky, you have a quorum.
Excellent. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Kendall, I think this is your first meeting, correct?
Yes, this is. I missed the first, and then I think last month was canceled. So.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot
okay.
And ask you to introduce yourself quickly to the rest of the commission. And depending on people's appetite for doing so, maybe we'll go quickly and have people introduce themselves and give a 2-sentence introduction.
Okay, great. I am a junior studying at the University of Michigan. My major is pipes of the environment, and I have a minor in public policy. In addition to school, though, I'm also working part-time as like an environmental consultant, and I'm doing that virtually from my apartment, which is definitely a lot for this school year, but I am excited to do so.
Excellent.
Chair Mirsky, I apologize to go backwards. I forgot our council members.
You did.
I did.
And
Yeah.
they're smiling. So go ahead and
yeah. Councilmember Briggs.
Yes, here in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Radina.
So here in Ann Arbor.
Now you definitely have a quorum.
Excellent. Good catch. So welcome, Kendall. Great to have you on board. Real quickly, I'll introduce myself. So, you know, I'm chair. I'm retired after a career in industry. I am real active in a number of different environmental kinds of activities and advocacy. I'm also on the board of a nonprofit and was born and raised in Ann Arbor and glad to be back. I moved back in 2015. Carlene, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Kendall. Welcome. My name is Carlene Colvin Garcia. I'm the vice chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. I've been on the Energy Commission since 2017. And I really like to work like boots on the ground with community organizations, helping. I helped bring solar to the Ann Arbor Public School District right at the very beginning, first school. Worked a lot with safe transit, active transit, supporting kids to be able to walk and bike to school safely. And my big endeavor these days is electric vehicle charging. So putting my efforts into helping folks get access, especially those who live in like multi-unit dwellings. It's one of the nuts I'm cracking right now.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, so I represent the 5th Ward of Ann Arbor, which is on Ann Arbor's west side, and have been serving since 2020. I've lived in Ann Arbor for 20 years or so, background professionally in transportation, land use, a lot of advocacy and transportation issues, which was what kind of, and got me to council a little bit. And I guess that's enough for now.
Commissioner McComber.
Welcome, Kendall. I am the finance director of a local environmental nonprofit, the Ecology Center. I've been in Ann Arbor, gosh, going on 30 years, I think. And I served on the Parks Commission for about 6 years, and I've been on the Energy Commission, I think, for about that same amount of time. And I'll leave it there.
So Commissioner Zittelman, also a relatively new member.
Yeah, not too much to speak up on my background because I haven't been around for 20 years, but I recently graduated from U of M with a bachelor's in public policy and a focus in intersectional justice. And I spend a lot of my time focusing on how we can improve Ann Arbor, whether it be transportation or housing or energy or climate change or what have you.
Missy, you're famous, but do you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Hi, Kendall. I think we actually know each other, but I'm Missy Schultz, the Sustainability and Innovations Director. Nice to see you.
Commissioner Kerber.
Hi, Kendall. Welcome. And I am I guess I've been on the Energy Commission for a couple of years now, and I do solar development, commercial solar development primarily, in all across Washtenaw County and Southeast Michigan.
Commissioner Levin.
Welcome, Kendall. I'm Noah. I live on the west side of Ann Arbor. I first came to Ann Arbor at U of M a bit ago, and I'm now an attorney, and I do stuff with environmental law. Not as much with energy, but more so with air quality.
Councilmember Radina.
Thanks. Hi, Kendall. I am Travis Radina. I'm council member from Ward 3. I was elected in 2020. Live in the Bryant neighborhood, which has allowed me to work a lot with Missy and her team because the Bryant Community Center has been a great partner to OSI. And prior to serving, I also was president of the Jim Toy Community Center and was doing a lot in LGBTQ activism.
And Commissioner McCoy.
Hi, Kendall. I think there's a few new people since I've last been this. I have not been here in like 3 months. My name's Ember. I use she, her pronouns. I am a PhD candidate, which is a new thing. I was doing that one of the months I was gone. At the University of Michigan, I'm in the School for Environment and Sustainability. I study energy justice and air pollution issues around policy failures, mostly in Southwest Detroit. And I've been on the commission since, I think, 2018. Nice to meet you.
So Kendall, there's a couple of other people that we'll introduce just before they present. That's Tim McDonald and Brett Leonard. As you can see, Brett is with the city and Tim is a guest speaker, so we'll introduce them later. But I think the first thing to do then next is to get approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda and a second?
Motion
So moved by Commissioner McCoy and second by, what did I see? Somebody waved. Councilmember Briggs. Any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Unopposed. The agenda is approved as published. Next is approval of the minutes of our last meeting, which is the meeting in July. I can say I reviewed them and they look good to me. Hopefully the rest of you, or at least some of you, had a peek. Can I also get a motion to approve the minutes and a second? Motion by Commissioner Calvin Garcia and a second by Councilmember Radina. All those, any discussion of the minutes, any concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. Say yes, thank you. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. So we are now at public input. We'll also have a second chance at the end of the meeting. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand electronically, one by one, using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to raise your hand electronically to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet place and mute any background noise so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and your address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Dr. Stelz and Chair Mirsky. This is Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. Just so you know, the meeting ID on the published agenda is incorrect. Zoom tells you that it doesn't exist. Commissioner McCoy luckily passed on the correct meeting ID to me there, so I was able to call in. Anyway, this meeting is timely because the 820 Climate Action Plan has a big problem, I think. Strategy 2, Action 1 of the plan is, quote, promote home and building electrification, end quote, and assumes the following, quote, all new residential and commercial buildings are designed and built to operate without the use of natural gas, end quote. Strategy 3 is, quote, significantly improve the energy efficiency, end quote, in our buildings. Both strategies largely depended on the state revising its energy code to include the IECC Zero Code Appendix so that most new projects and major renovations can be net zero energy. It now looks like that's not going to happen, and the next code revision won't be for at least 5 years. Meanwhile, almost every month, the city reviews and approves gas burning and energy inefficient new construction. For example, the Planning Commission last week voted reluctantly in favor of the Village project off Duveren. The developer did agree to go all electric for the 164 single family homes, thanks, I think, to the efforts of at least one energy commissioner, but not the 32 apartment buildings, 10 units each, still with gas heating. That's 300,000 square feet total, with CO2 equivalent emissions of over 4,000 metric tons every year for the next 50 years probably, just from gas. So if no zero code appendix, then what is our plan B? I have my own ideas, which I don't have time to go into. Instead, I'll pose a second question. That question is, are sustainability and affordability in new buildings compatible? I think the dominant view here is that they are not. But I think that's a false narrative. I suspect we'll hear a different view tonight from Tim McDonald, and I very much look forward to his presentation. But even without passive buildings, I think we can have affordable net zero energy construction. One revelation from the Village debate was just how close utility costs are between gas and electric if you assume high efficiency heat pumps and if you plug current gas rates into the cost algorithm. While costs of electric heating are still higher than with gas, cooling costs are $140 a year lower per unit, and that's at last year's gas prices. Assuming those low prices, just adding 2 kilowatts of rooftop solar per unit on average would more than wipe out the remaining difference. So we don't have to choose between affordable and sustainable in new construction. And yet in most cases, we get neither. That needs to change, and fast.
Thank you for your comments.
That's all, Chair Mirsky.
That's all. Okay, great. So next point on the agenda is a planning and sustainability in Ann Arbor presentation by the head of our planning department, Brett Leonard. Brett, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'd like everybody to know that Brett is also going to be attending a planning commission meeting tonight. So we're really fortunate that we are having here. Brett and Shannon Gibrandel, chair of the planning commission, Missy and I met on the 30th of August to talk about this meeting and possibly a future meeting where we meet jointly to talk about these topics. We will probably talk again after tonight to see where we want to take what we learned tonight and what we learn hopefully after sleeping over it and talk about next steps. But Brett, if you want to introduce yourself real quickly and then launch into your presentation. I think you have some slides. That would be great. And thanks again for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chair Mirsky, and thank you to the Commission for having me. As John so eloquently introduced, my name is Brett Leonard. I'm the planning manager for the city. And the Planning Commission is the commenter, I think, highlighted issues that you are grappling with, that the Planning Commission is grappling with, that we are grappling with as a community. And so my goal here is to nerd out a little bit at you with planning and zoning, just to help set a framework about what that is, why we do it, some of the barriers and challenges of it, and talk to you a little bit about some of the opportunities that could evolve in the future towards sustainability goals. So I do have to jump to a planning commission meeting at 7 o'clock, but I will stay here as long as I can. So I don't have too many slides, and I'm happy to address any questions. And if we don't get to all the questions, or there's follow-up, I'm happy to follow up as well. So as indicated, let me hopefully pull up my slides. Can you see?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And I just do want to brag a little bit. Normally, my planning commission, who has to deal with me all the time, just gets boring black and white text PowerPoint presentations. So you're welcome. So planning and zoning, and I, despite its title, I do want to let you know that I will definitely talk about how it relates to the city's sustainability goals, but I want to make sure we're all starting from a similar understanding. So this is a very chaotic kind of chart about the overall development review process and planning process and what it means. And I just want to briefly walk you through and orient you to this as to why it's important. So planning and zoning are partners, and planning is policy and zoning is law and regulation. And so the comprehensive planning process is the most wide open, the most community engaged, the most fully engaged in community engagement. It is the widest opportunity for us to think big, to think far reaching, to think creatively, progressively about the challenges that are facing us as a community, informed by the past, informed by data, informed by trends. And it is a very broad opportunity to identify the concerns, the opportunities that we want to be as a community at some point in the horizon. Plans often pick a point for that horizon, and they go through a filtering process in a way of gathering wide community engagement, trying to prioritize the common, most important elements that we hear from the community, and memorializing those as community goals with recommendations as to how we can go about achieving that. All of that process is strictly policy creation. It's strictly creating ideas. It's strictly articulating a vision. At the end of any comprehensive planning process, nothing changes in our community from a regulatory perspective. No matter what we say in that comprehensive plan, it doesn't switch the legal expectations of how private land is developed in our community. The plan does tee up ideas and recommendations to that end. More specifically, we plan not only to create a vision of what we want to be as a community in the future, but because we're directed to do so. State law directs communities to create planning commissions and to provide for city planning. Our code of ordinances specifically directs the planning commission to prepare a plan for the orderly development of the city. And both state law and our own local bylaws of the planning commission direct us to look at that on a regular basis. And over time, the most recent modification and update of our comprehensive planning has been pretty significant through the adoption of new planning documents into our planning canon. But again, plan is visioning. It is ideation. It is, what do we want to be? When do we want to get there? Who do we want to be as a community? I will do my best to always use the term comprehensive plan. I am still a long-term planner that has used the term master plan for a long time. We're specifically trying to shift away from that. Master plan can evoke images of slavery or paternalism, or even more of a finality. And even these policy documents are not intended to be final. They are, like any other conversation in a community, reflective of who we are at the time, the trends of the time, and setting a goal in the future. And so that is why you'll see some documents of the past invoke the term master plan, the Planning Commission and staff are really shifting towards the term comprehensive plan as a more appropriate term of that endeavor. The city's plan is plans. It's made up of documents that went through that ideation process. And here in the city, they were often very focused on a particular, in the past, geography or aspect or component of planning. And when those plans are crafted, they also are adopted through a very prescribed manner by state law. And at the conclusion of that state law, with their adoption, the city council says, we are hereby incorporating this document into our comprehensive plan. And since 2004, the city council has done that with 8 documents that you see here. So together, collectively, this is the city's vision for its future. These are the goals and aspirations of where we want to be in the future. And just as an aside, we are embarking on the process to update our comprehensive plan. And when I see this slide, I see a lot of opportunity to simplify and consolidate our vision. Whether it's you as stakeholders and policy advisors, decision makers such as the Planning Commission or Zoning Board of Appeals or Historic District Commission or legislative body, the City Council, the notion of having not only this multiple thousand pages at the ready to guide your policy decisions and legislative decisions in the city is intimidating. And at times, because the city has approached these in sort of focused ways, there's even potential for conflicting ideas evolving out of these documents. So going forward, I think that there's a great opportunity for us to be more clear, more concise, and make a comprehensive plan that is more usable and accessible, not only to stakeholders and decision makers, but the public and property owners alike. As it relates to sustainability, our comprehensive plan is pretty sparse. The 2013 sustainability framework did a lot of work to aggregate ideas and concepts from 7 other documents and try to find commonalities and threads. As it relates, and there are other sustainability aspects in our natural features and just how we develop housing in the city and moving towards multimodal transit. But specifically as it relates to energy supply and energy efficiency of buildings, somewhat teed up by Chair Miskey and the introduction to this, these are the policies that are in those comprehensive planning documents that relate to this. Improve access to and use of renewable energy by all members of our community, reduce energy consumption and eliminate net greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce buildings' energy use, carbon impact, and construction waste. So all of those documents take us to this point. Those documents have reflected, of course, a lot of community dialogue, a lot of discussion, a lot of time, a lot of setting those visions and goals, and have identified goals that to implement those goals is plans set forth recommendations to make amendments. That could be either to our zoning map, that is more broadly what types of development should happen in what geographies in our city, or text amendments. That is, these legislative decisions, these are the most critical aspects of that planning process, because until these are crafted, considered, and adopted, they don't apply to the other side of this line, which is when you as a small property owner considering your dwelling, or a large property owner considering a wide, impactful re-envisioning of an entire area or blocks. Our ordinances are how we communicate minimum standards, maximum standards, and how we communicate, if you do these things, you can expect to be approved to do these things in our community, because You are delivering us the typology and the location of the development that we want to see in our city. Without those text amendments, again, the plan can be the greatest comprehensive plan ever conceived by any community. It doesn't change regulatory framework until it follows with actions and ordinances that make those requirements of development going forward. And in a way, I think this right here is the tension that you and the Planning Commission, and to an extent, I think the City Council and our community are grappling with. We know that we are facing some very critical challenges, huge challenges, and that has largely been concluded on this side of the line. And we don't yet feel like we have all the tools and amendments and codes on this side of the line to deliver us with the aspiration that we want. So zoning, planning and zoning is the other side of that line. Zoning is the actual regulation of designating and limiting the height, bulk, number of stories, uses, and size of dwellings, buildings, and structure. This is what the state of Michigan says zoning is to be used for. It is all done to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. I'm missing a quotation mark there. So much for my editor. However, I want to be clear. This is a phrase that can be very challenging for communities. To promote the public health and safety and welfare is not, at times that I have seen it questioned or invoked, as a open blank canvas opportunity to attach any requirement to a decision, but rather it is the basis by which zoning regulations achieve something. We regulate and designate where uses can be, how high buildings can be, the uses of those buildings by geography in order to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. We accomplish that by a regulatory framework. We don't accomplish it by stating it or restating it. And sometimes that can be a challenge of communities. Ideally, of course, our zoning reflects our vision, and the proposed development that happens is delivered in such a way that it meets our community goals. It reflects our values. It reflects our aspirations. So, as I said, the Planning Commission is very interested in this. Chair Mursky talked about our conversation where I gather part of that is because you are having these similar conversations here at your table and struggling with similar issues. And so this is how staff and the Planning Commission are starting to think about this challenge of that switch from policy to implementation. We have those same goals in our land use comprehensive plan. We have the benefit of a lot of work that the community has done with Dr. Stoltz and the City Council identifying other community climate, the Day 20 plan adoption. That is not, you will see it was not adopted with that process and add-on that says we want this to be part of our comprehensive plan. And there's a lot of aspects of that plan that I don't think necessarily would fit in a comprehensive land use plan, but there's definitely some connections. A couple of them here identified. I think some of these were referenced earlier in the meeting. Promoting home and business electrification and updating building codes. These are two recommendations that are just absolutely, I think, to the core of how do we change our building stock to a more sustainable model. And how the Planning Commission has been thinking about this is electrification, energy efficiency, and solar energy readiness. Even that work, though, I just want to be very transparent and clear, is very, very challenging. I talked to you about the zoning, what the intent of zoning is to do. And here is the intention of the State Construction Code Act, which you will see, and I'm sure that you have discussed this. This act is the act to prescribe energy conservation standards. This is where the state legislature tells us how, as a state, we will prescribe energy efficiency of buildings in this regard. The Graham Sustainability Institute has opined on it as well via the Clean Energy Michigan series. Not definitively, I want to be clear, this is not a well-respected opinion, but they also recognize that it's likely could be challenged, likely maybe even would be challenged. The best way to do this is to update the code, which you've discussed and you heard from a commenter tonight. Really challenging. It's really difficult. And one of the opportunities to keep thinking about zoning is that is a local ordinance, whereas that construction code is not adopted by us. We are directed to adopt something. On top of this, you're starting to have some state legislative rumblings. I would say I don't think these bills have gone very far. They've gotten to committees, both in the state and the House, to preemptively ban communities such as Ann Arbor from enacting laws that would prohibit natural gas connection. It does it in different ways, but no legislative historian. This has happened in the past. The city in the past was considering rent control along with the city of Detroit. State legislator steps in and preemptively prohibits rent control. Washtenaw County looking at banning plastic bags from a sustainability perspective. The state steps in. So it's just another challenge on top of an already sort of challenging legislative framework. But that's not a definitive answer. The city has adopted these goals. And so I think the Planning Commission, speaking for the Planning Commission and staff, we certainly feel that it's part of our mission from that policy direction to consider the most creative ways that we can advance these goals. And so there are more questions here than answers, but I just want to set sort of some of my preliminary thoughts and some of the conversation that's been happening at the Planning Commission as well. There are some connections specifically in planning to infrastructure, to energy. Again, it's not definitive. I think that there is a better connection of zoning and land use to infrastructure and energy use. So I think that electrification is really an opportunity for us to consider. Again, it's going to go through a lot of review by people smarter than I, but I think that there is at least a nexus there in the intention of that legislation and what the legislation, the Planning Act and the Zoning Act are trying to accomplish. Energy efficiency, I think, is more challenging. Not to say it doesn't have a place in zoning, but I think that from the Construction Code Act, I think it is probably harder at this point for me to envision a requirement incorporated in zoning to a higher building energy efficiency standard. I think that is going to have to happen through incentives or other mechanisms to do so. The challenge of all of those things is finding the right triggers, the appropriate times that it gets invoked. And I think particularly with energy efficiency, in my brief experience with this from a zoning perspective, even over the last decade, the benchmark, the standard, the specification has evolved even in that time period. And I would just say that gives me pause in trying to memorialize that in a zoning ordinance to specify any energy efficiency standard when it seems to be a pretty recently evolving field, evolving quicker than zoning ordinances typically do. And then I think The last is the context of the city versus surrounding communities. In a way, I think the city has set this policy, and that context is not important in that regard. On the other hand, I think it does have implications in transportation patterns and transit patterns. And we have to think about how making progress in maybe energy connections and energy efficiency doesn't set us back in other regards of sustainably developed community aspects. So I'll stop there. Happy to address any questions that we can get to this evening, critiques. And again, if we don't get to something, I'm happy to follow up as well.
Brett, thank you very much. We appreciated all the color and the graphics, as well as the content, so well done. I'd like to open things up for comments and questions.
Well, that was easy.
We're not going to let you off that easily, though. I have, oh, there we go. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just have one question. I'm not sure if you would know the answer, but are there like no municipalities in the state of Michigan that have their own construction codes and requirements and stuff?
I don't know that answer. If there are any, I guess my understanding is no, that some communities might modify the state construction code. But I think that communities find safety in being part of a larger group rather than deviating from building codes, which are often really seen as core health and safety. I think for that same reason, there's probably not too many communities, if any, that develop their own. So my gut would be some communities make some modifications to it, but I'm guessing probably not very significant.
All right, thank you.
It'd be a better question, of course, for our building official. I can try to follow up on that.
Others? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, one piece struck me as we have not yet adopted into the comprehensive plan our recent A20 plan. So relying on the 2013 sustainability framework. That seems like a logical next step for us to do. Is there any thoughts around that?
Yeah, we're in the process of, like I said, kicking off a comprehensive plan process. That is one of the central themes we are articulating in that. We want the plan to reflect a sustainable lens to land use planning. We want it to reflect an equitable lens that not only recognizes past wrongs, but seeks to repair those to the extent possible. And does this all ideally without losing sight of affordability, which remains an acute problem. So,
okay, thanks. And I'll save some other comments till later.
Commissioner Kerber.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I am one of my pet peeves is when I see large developments of condos and someone wants to put solar on it, and you look at the roof, and the roof has dormers, and the dormers are all facing south. You have a whole large roof, the whole length of the city block, and dormers on every single part of it. It is, yet on the north side, there's nothing. It just seems like something that could be done with the architects of these projects just to get them some awareness that you're taking away those people's solar future by doing this.
Yeah, and I appreciate the critique. The Planning Commission has taken steps over recent history and the City Council as well through adoption to try and make solar installations more flexible and more prevalent. I think the Planning Commission thinks that there's more opportunity to go further in that regard as well. So that might be something that can be looked at. We've recently had an example too, where the Planning Commission actually had to, the Planning Commission proactively undid a very common housing association covenant that prohibited solar panels on a proposed development. This was, so I think that it reflects there's still a lot of sort of, I would just say general market-based inertia that we have to push against on a lot of fronts, but that's a great critique.
Brett, while others think of their questions, and by the way, we'll keep Brett maybe for another 5 minutes at maximum because Brett has to run the planning commission meeting that starts at 7, so we need to let him go. You showed the interesting graphic at the very beginning about the comprehensive planning process. Is there the intent to coordinate closely the comprehensive plan update that the university, or excuse me, that the city is doing together with the university's update of its campus plan? As far as I know, it's intended that that's going to happen at the same place, and the university is so interwoven in with the city. Is that an explicit intent on both parties' side? Do you know?
I don't know. I could just share. In the past, we have broached those conversations, and I think that there is enough distinction between our goals at times where there hasn't been a lot of momentum towards a more unified planning process. The more embraced aspects of that, I think, have been, how do we collectively avoid sort of engagement fatigue? How do we make sure we're reaching our respective audiences in the greatest way possible? My grizzled, somewhat sarcastic planner history would tell me that it seems unlikely to me that we would get there. So I think trying to find the intersects is probably a great first start. So I do envision an acknowledgement of that and sort of trying to tee up that opportunity. I don't have deliverables in my eyes yet as to what success looks like there.
Just a brief commentary from my side. I'm hoping that the values of the university and the city overlap to a greater degree than maybe what they have in the past, because of the 2 carbon neutrality plans, as well as the need to address affordable housing. This is also an issue with the university in its contract negotiations, for example, because housing costs are going up at double the rate of pay increases for university employees. And so this is an issue, and the university is an engine of growth. So hopefully those 2 interests spur greater level of collaboration than in the past. I would also add that the university, particularly on, both housing and greenhouse gas emissions also overlap in the area of transportation and commuting emissions. And if the city does not add additional housing, and I know we're doing work with transit corridor rezoning, but if new jobs and new students have to live outside the city, then the city is not going to meet its transportation emission reduction targets, nor with the university. And so, all these areas, emissions in general, transportation, housing, there really is an opportunity for win-win outcomes, in my view.
I would just add, apart from carbon emission goals, as time passes, the ability of our infrastructure to accommodate the growth of the university will become challenged.
Indeed.
Our roads will need to, our transportation network will have to find other ways to move people around, because we won't be able to build roads to accommodate the trajectory that we've been on. So,
just a quick comment. I was with a group that met with the U of M CFO. The university has added 6,000 employees and 6,000 students in the last 7 years. And the CFO said he sees nothing that is going to change that basic trend. Maybe not the slope of the line, but the basic trend line is likely to continue. And that poses a big challenge for the university and the city. I need to respect your time, and I really thank you for joining us tonight. And I look forward to further collaboration, at least within the city and between our two commissions and departments on some of these topics. So there's a couple other things that I noted down, and we can take those up at a later time. And I would encourage other commissioners to do the same. If you have some thoughts on these, let's save these, let's gather them together, let's talk about them. And we hopefully will have some additional ideas that come out of Tim's presentation here coming up soon. So
thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I do have to run to that other meeting, but thank you for recording this. Just to follow up on Mr. Chair Mirsky's comments, part of our intention is recording this conversation that's going to follow, to share with the planning commissioners as well. So all the examples and insight that we can provide is just going to help everybody. So thanks for doing that for us as well.
Great. Thank you, Brett.
Take care.
Have a good meeting. So, Councilmember Briggs, sorry, I didn't give you an opportunity to comment.
No, I figured I would wait until after Brett left because it really didn't need his, it's just comments. And didn't want to use up his precious time. So I used to serve on planning commission prior to coming onto council. So just wanted to provide a few additional thoughts. He obviously talked about the challenges around electrification and energy efficiency. And that's kind of those discussions that have been coming up on our commission. I think it's just important to know how we're, I think at the planning commission is also thinking about these issues in terms of, and this will be an integral part of the comprehensive planning process that we're launching, kind of how do we want our city to grow, and how do we support sustainable lifestyles. And so when you think about, historically the separation of, we've moved towards separation of land uses. So residential is one area, commercial is in another area, office is in another. And as we're as we're reflecting on those land use patterns, obviously that is something that encourages driving. So there's a real emphasis on thinking about how we around more mixed use, around 20-minute neighborhoods, developing our land use in a pattern that enables sustainable lifestyles. I think it's also important to note that in the carbon neutrality plan, we say that 17% of our greenhouse emissions come from transportation. We did not count the figure into that the commuters, the emissions outside of the city. So we've got 80,000 commuters who are coming into the city every single day, at least pre-COVID, and those emissions are not counted in our figures. So the more we are already not factoring that in, and the more that grows, the more challenging it is. So that's another piece in terms of providing additional housing in our community. That's an important piece, and that's where the tension, as we know, kind of comes in terms of housing growth that is not electrified versus meeting that with that real housing need that we have. So I just wanted to put those in as comments. And acknowledge, at least say we're recognizing there's a lot of tension at the council table around these different goals that we have around affordability and sustainability, and it's challenging right now.
So thank you for those insights. Does anybody else have anything to share or questions? I had some thoughts, but I may share those or hold those to the end of the meeting, anticipating comments from others and maybe even public comments. So what I think we'll do is move on to the next section of our discussion about this general topic. And actually, I'm going to present some slides first. And Missy, are you there that you can bring them up, or do you want me to? I think, share my desktop.
I can, although I think you are co-host.
Okay, yeah, I've got them right here, so I'll go ahead and do that. So we go to slideshow. Oops. So I had mentioned earlier that we had met together with the Planning Commission representatives on the 30th, and I put together this framing document in an hour or so before that meeting, and I thought it might be helpful in sort of staging why we're having this meeting tonight and the topics that we're considering. And so I wanted to cover that quickly before turning things over to Tim. There's a lot of construction going on in Ann Arbor. A lot of it is in the housing area. We know that Ann Arbor lacks housing. Demand has far outstripped supply because of the growth of the U of M, as well as tech spinoff. We have, as a result, housing costs that have, as I mentioned, increased at roughly double the rate of the CPI and local earnings increases. As Ken Garber, when he gave public comments, mentioned that the carbon neutrality plan, the 820 carbon neutrality plan, makes it clear that all new buildings in Ann Arbor need to be all electric, energy efficient, and powered by renewable energy. And as Tim is going to point out to us, that's backed up by the science that says we need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions 65% and eliminate by 2030 and eliminate emissions by 2040 to have a 66% chance of holding global warming to 1.5%. We have another challenge, and that is building costs have risen substantially since before the pandemic. There's also, I would say, this is my framing, so some people may not share this, but I believe there is a widely held paradigm in Michigan and certainly in southeastern Michigan that sustainable housing, not just affordable, but also market rate, can't be developed property. I don't know that this is a problem statement, but I would posit that if you take a total systems thinking approach, housing costs are really the sum of what an individual or a family unit is paying in terms of mortgage or their rental payments. It's also their utility costs. It's also their transportation costs, commuting and other related daily transit costs. And then I would also add the opportunity cost of time in transit. And that is a particularly valuable resource, especially for many lower income people who can't afford to live in Ann Arbor, try to reduce their mortgage costs or their rental costs by living outside the city, but as a result, spend more on transportation and more time in transit. And that is then a cost in terms of opportunity to do other things. And then there's also the belief in many views that all electric buildings substantially increase utility costs for heating, hot water, and cooking compared to utilizing natural gas as the energy source, because natural gas prices have been historically low. Obviously, that's changed, and it's hard to forecast what it's going to look like in the future, but these are some of the situations that we're dealing with. So in terms of a solution set and what the benefits might be, energy efficient buildings, for those, for example, those built to passive house standards, as Tim is going to run through, with high performance envelopes and balanced ventilation, cut energy use by roughly 75%, thereby offsetting the all electric utility cost premium versus natural gas, as proven by many, many projects across the United States and worldwide. If you employ best design and construction practices, such as efficient mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design and layouts, offsite modular construction, And if you're using very energy efficient or passive house premiums, they offset those premiums, I should say, for energy efficient or passive house construction. Again, proven by hundreds of projects. And it's therefore deposit, and Tim is going to provide us proof of that tonight, not only with data, but with his personal experience and anecdotes. As a result, energy efficient and passive house buildings that are all electric, net zero ready, can be constructed and operated at cost comparable to traditional cost or code compliant buildings. Moreover, energy efficient or passive house all electric buildings provide significant other advantages behind lower energy costs and greenhouse gas reductions, including high resiliency to extreme weather, power outages, and utility cost uncertainty, and increased occupant health and comfort through the elimination of drafts, radiant heat losses, exposure to combustion gases and the health concerns associated with that, and then also reduce risk of mold, bacteria, pests, and cardiovascular stress. So when the four of us met that I mentioned back in August, we basically agreed that we would present the documented benefits of all electric, energy efficient and passive house construction. And that's why we have Tim here tonight. And that the other element of this is that we hopefully can work together, the Energy Commission, the Planning Commission, City Council, pulling input in from others to devise and implement strategies that either require or incentivize the construction of the kinds of buildings that I've mentioned. And so that's what we plan on doing going forward. So I am going to turn things over to Tim, and I am going to take a second to introduce him so he doesn't have to brag and I can brag for him. Tim is the president and CEO of Onion Flats. That is a Philadelphia headquartered firm that was founded in 1997. The firm provides architectural development, general contracting, and green roof and solar system installation services. Tim's a licensed architect in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. In addition, he has been an adjunct professor at 4 different universities. And like all of us here tonight, he has been active in his community, for example, by serving on a zoning committee, serving on the Philadelphia Sustainability Advisory Board, and as founder and president of FAARM or FARM, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the exhibition of art and architecture in Philadelphia. Finally, Tim is certified LEED accredited professional and a passive house certified consultant and tradesman. Tim knows all aspects of the real estate business from firsthand experience. We are lucky to have him join us this evening. Before turning things over to Tim, I have one request or ground rule. Tim's presentation is going to be rapid fire, and so we are planning on having Q&A at the end. So please note your questions and a slide number if relevant, and then we'll take those at the end. Tim, take it away.
John, I don't know if I'm going to live up to that intro.
Oh, for sure.
But thanks for having me. Let me share my screen. What a great group of people. I actually didn't know that I was going to be after all that. And so I learned a lot about you guys, and it's great to see what perspective you're all coming from. As John mentioned, I'm an architect and a developer and a builder. We just had our 25th anniversary this summer of our company. In 1997, really just to be able to control the process, the design process. I'm an architect first, and so I really just wanted to be able to design and build the kinds of projects that we wanted design and build. And in the process, along the way, we developed some companies to support the development of those projects, a green roof and solar company called Grass. So currently, we're not doing a lot of development, but we are ramping up our architecture firm, and we're starting to work across the country, as well as our green roof and solar company. And I think the thing that pretty much has driven us for the past 15 years, at least, has been knowing that buildings are responsible for almost half of all greenhouse gas emissions. And, as an architect, knowing that, I can't ignore it. And then if you connect that with the fact that urban environments with transportation and industry and everything else are responsible for 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions. So if we think we have a chance in hell of solving this climate crisis, we've got to do it with buildings and cities. There's no possible way to do it if we don't. So for me, it's what I refer to as the new gravity of our time, in the sense that just like gravity is literally foundational, we can't go halfway with gravity. It's fundamental to who we are. This is now too. And we can address it this way, as we have been for the past couple of decades. I love this art piece in Germany called "Politicians Discussing Global Warming." Or we can handle it like we started to in 2015 at the COP21 conference. First time in human history that almost every country on this planet agreed that that carbon and climate change is the greatest existential threat to humanity. And so we've got to do something about it. And essentially what came out of that for architects and developers is that carbon neutral, net zero energy buildings need to be standard practice by 2050. So now we're at COP27 and we'll see just how that goes, but we've got a lot of work to do. And I don't know if you know this website. I find it refreshing every once in a while to just check how much carbon do we have left to emit into the environment. Well, here it is. This is the 1.5 degree centigrade scenario. This is the 2. Of course, we don't want to go for that 2 degree scenario. We want to go for the 1.5. So notice that number, 289 gigatons of CO2 left to emit. Okay, so I'm going to put that in a little bit of context. In 2020, if it looked as if we may be peaking emissions, and let's just assume for a second that we did, which we didn't, and you drew a line directly from 2020 peak emissions down to 2050 as the COP21 prescribed, 2050, right? The area underneath that line is equivalent to 600 gigatons of CO2. So in 2020, we had 340 gigatons of CO2 left to emit. So if this was like best case scenario, straight line to 2050, and we're emitting almost twice as much carbon as we have left to emit. In fact, it's more like this. This is what we need to do. 2050 is too late because we've squandered all these years. We've got to reduce by 2030, 65% of our emissions in order to think that we're going to hit that 300 gigaton of CO2 mark. It's really just about carbon. So, I loved the discussion earlier with Brett about how challenging it is to put these policies into practice, right? But I think we don't remind ourselves enough of what we're trying to solve here and how important it is and how significant it is if we don't. So, so for me, 18 years from now, carbon neutral buildings, net zero energy buildings need to be standard practice? Wow. Yeah, pretty much across the world. Let's just try to, see if we can do it in the United States, but this is across the world. So what does that mean? For me, what it means as an architect and developer and builder, it's that, because I'm not a fan of carbon offsets, buying, the math there just doesn't work for me. How about we all just design buildings that can generate enough energy on their own footprint? Let's just try to do that, right? Let's see if we can do that within urban environments. It's challenging, no question about it. So is that possible? This is a typical row home up and down the East Coast. This one in Philadelphia. This is about how much energy that home needs to survive. Could this become a net zero energy building? It could, but it would need a roof that's 5 times as big as what it has, right? So if that's all it's got, then the consumption of energy inside the building needs to be equally reduced by 80%. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you make that happen? Well, turns out we all know that heating and cooling of that building is more than half the issue. So what's the best heating and cooling system out there? To me, it's a coat. If you have a really well insulated coat that's airtight, you don't need anything inside other than your body heat. That's the essence of Passive House. Passive House is a fabric first approach to thinking about designing buildings to meet this challenge. If you think about the fabric, the envelope of the building first, it's actually the cheapest place to guarantee energy efficiency over time. You can reduce your energy consumption by up to 80% within a building. We know how to do this. You know that if you poured hot soup into that plastic cup versus this thermos, how long it would take for that plastic cup for the soup to get cold, right? We know how to wrap a thermos in an envelope that's airtight and really well insulated so that hot liquid can stay hot for days without any energy. That's what Passive House is all about. It's thinking about the building as this really tight, well-insulated coat, and that you warm the space up as much as you possibly can with the free energy of the sun. That's how you heat it. Well, what about cooling it? Well, Yeti coolers. You can put ice in a Yeti cooler without any heat pump, and that ice will stay there for days, right? We know how to do this. And I don't know if you have heard about the Icebox Challenge. It's been this thing that's taken off around the world. Passive House aficionados have said, let's demonstrate the wonder of a Passive House envelope. What if we take a ton of ice, put it on a platform, and then put a little code-built building over top of that ton of ice, and then do the same thing right next to it, and wrap that in a Passive House envelope, and then set it out in the sun for 18 days and see what happens. And so I think this is in Canada. There's that ton of ice, and then the Passive House envelope is coming down, being put over it. This is one that was done in Philadelphia. On the left is the code-built building, and on the right is the Passive House building, and those are the blocks of ice. And they put them on. 18 days later, guess what happened? The code building, the ice is gone. The Passive House building, more than half of it is there. So it's a Yeti cooler. It's pretty easy to visualize. But this is what we really need to understand. This is a Passive House brownstone retrofit that was done in the middle of this row of buildings. This is what our cities are really about. We're just heating our streets, right? So, and this isn't about just passive houses. This is about any building type. It doesn't matter. The size, the scale, the typology, the same basic 5 principles are what matter. Super airtight, really well insulated building, good thermal envelope without any bridges between the outside and the inside. Of course, high performance windows and doors. And then when you make it that well insulated and airtight, you've got to give it a lung to breathe. So the other wonderful thing about Passive House is that it's superior indoor air quality. So it's the healthiest indoor air environment possible. And this is all we do. And we do it around the country. I could give a whole presentation on our retrofit. We're trying to tackle the really difficult nut of retrofits across this country with several projects in the Boston area. We're doing large scale, small scale. We've got a mass timber tower, 16-story tower, Passive House, net zero tower that we're doing in Philadelphia. Some projects that are under construction, big and small, all around the country. And all Passive House, all going for net zero energy. It's all we do. And so I thought I might show you a couple of projects that we've actually done. This was in 2015, 26 townhome development. When we can orient our buildings to the south, we do. Depends on the size and orientation of the site. In this case, we did. We created these 3 blocks of buildings that face south that we could really control the sun in the summer and winter, and then created these muses in between. But I also like to say that it's not enough to know how to design differently, designing net zero buildings as standard. We've got to totally rethink how we build them too, because we've been building buildings one stick at a time in the rain, sleet, and snow on site for 100 years, more than 100 years. And I think the construction industry, I saw a graph recently, the construction industry was looked at in terms of how efficiency and productivity over the past 100 years. The construction industry is the only one that's gone down compared to any other industry. And so for me, what that means is prefabrication. We've got to start thinking about how we build much better quality, more efficient, faster buildings and factories, or panels in factories, you'll see. And in this case, we modularized 3 of these townhomes. And this is them being installed. And this is with the plumbing and the electric, a lot of the finishes in place. So it looks like, so the first 3 were built in our modular factory. We had multiple partners on this project, and they had relationships with other builders, and so they wanted to use those builders. But all the buildings were still built to the same specification, Passive House specification. And I also like to push this narrative about, my dad used to say that any good idea has to have at least 3 functions. So this is a perfect example. If a roof just sheds water, it's not a good idea. A roof, especially in an urban environment, needs to do so much more work. It needs to manage stormwater. It needs to generate power for your building. It needs to give you outdoor space and views. It needs to reduce the cooling from the heat in the summertime. So I'm a big fan of integrating systems because it becomes more efficient, more cost effective. People don't let anybody tell you that you can't put a green roof below solar panels. You absolutely can. It's just about how you do it. And when you make these buildings really tight, you've got to give it balanced ventilation. So we're constantly exchanging air and filtering it inside these buildings. And this is one of our first times testing how airtight it needs to be. And Passive House is 0.6 ACH 50. And we hit the blower door test here. And at $150 a square foot at the time, that was the same cost as code built construction. And in terms of getting to net zero, we demonstrated that they still can put another 4 kW on each one of these roofs, and that would get them to zero. We've calculated, but currently this is 12 months worth of data. 2,500 square foot townhome, all electric, all utilities, $90 a month, and another 4 kW, and that would be zero. Right around the corner in the same neighborhood, this is actually four sites. This was the phase one that we did in 1999. Phase two, which was a LEED Platinum set of duplexes, and then we came back 9 years later, and built phase three, which is our passive house project we call the Battery. It's a 25-unit apartment building. I won't go into detail about the systems. I'm just going to kind of refer to them. I'll talk about systems a little bit later in another project, but these are all centralized systems. And we're focusing a lot these days on which makes the most sense: centralized, decentralized systems like HVAC and hot water systems. So we spend a lot of our time testing different approaches to find just the right strategy. In this case, centralized, I wouldn't do that again. It's one of the things we learned from this. Anyway, ground floor, we had 13 parking spaces required, small lobby and a couple of units, really simple double-loaded corridor, mostly one-bedroom units, a couple of 2 beds. And in this case, again, interested in prefabrication, but not modular this time. The most difficult thing about a passive house is the envelope. We didn't want to train an entire group of, contractors on site. So we thought, let's have the envelope delivered. So this is a panelized strategy that came to site in those pallets. We unpacked them. These walls, which have the 2x6 structure, the air barrier built in, the rigid insulation, continuous rigid insulation, weather resistant barrier, and the triple pane doors and windows already installed. It actually cost me less to build this high performance building than it would have cost me if I did it site built, because they built this in half the time that they would typically do it. The other thing we tested here was does it make sense to take up the room and the cost of creating individual meters for every single apartment, especially if it's a passive house and, a 1-bedroom apartment might cost $20 a month. And why not just simplify that, reduce the upfront costs for the electrical system, and have 1 meter? We give tenants a $50, we include a $50 a month utility kind of bank account in their rent, and we monitor how much energy they use, and if they use wildly more than they're supposed to, then we'll just raise their rent the following year. And it's been working really well. I mean, $50 a month is half what they would be paying in any other apartment building. So tenants love it. And it was less costly to build and really efficient. Blower door test day on construction sites. It's when the beer bottles come out and people are excited. And this was a fun day because we hit the blower door test. Here's the building. I'll just say this one thing. The panels, these white panels that you see, they have LED lights above them, and those LED lights are tied into the energy monitoring system of the building. And each one of those lights has an IP address connected to each apartment, but nobody knows which light is connected to which apartment. And so if you're using the allotted amount of energy that you're supposed to, your light will go green. But you may be blowing your energy budget, your light will glow red, or you might be kind of in between, and this cautionary yellow. So this kind of tongue-in-cheek thing that gets built into the architecture that just helps start a conversation about energy and how we're doing. Certified Pass project, our largest to date, and just under $170 a square foot. It was in line with everyday code built buildings around us. Here's the east side of that, the parking underneath. Here's the west facade with those shading devices, as well as the LED lights and panels. And this is a different way of integrating solar into a project. Especially, it makes a lot of sense in an urban environment, because then you can grow your food. These panels are translucent. They're bifacial solar panels, and so they're just two pieces of glass. There's no opaque backing to it. So they let a lot of light in, and they shade it really wonderfully in the summertime. So it's a really great place to hang out. I think this is what a lot of buildings should look like in urban environments. Really simple, but intentionally, we try to make spaces that feel larger than they are. The translucent glass helps. Even borrowing light and bringing it into a bathroom above a closet, so you don't turn lights on, motivates us as well. We're monitoring, even though we're not metering, individual consumption, and the building has an EUI. I don't know if you know what EUI. It's essentially a miles per gallon for buildings. And a typical EUI for this kind of a project would be 59, 60, and the EUI for this is 10. So 83% better than a typical building. Project up this in the next neighborhood to the north, 28 unit apartment building plus our offices, actually, called Front Flats. Totally decentralized strategies for mechanical systems, and I will talk a little bit about that. But of course, the obvious thing here is this large solar wrap that I'll certainly jump into right away. And at $180 a square foot, again, at the time, this is pre-COVID, this was everyday code built construction stuff around us. Now, we could find people building for less than that, we could also find code builders that were building more than that. So, and it's shrouded, in fact, in solar panels, actually, but it's done in a very particular way. And this is a different way of integrating solar into your buildings. We started to think about it just as much as a material, or having multiple functions, more than just generating power. And so we're floating these panels about 24 inches off the facade. You can see they're somewhat translucent, that light carries through. But the reason why it's doing that is because it's got a triple function. It's obviously generating power, both from the front and the back. But this all important issue in passive house buildings, you've got to keep the sun out in the summertime. You've got to keep direct radiant heat from coming in the summertime. So you've got to shade those windows. But in the wintertime, as the sun is lower in the sun, it lets in that free heat. And then the third thing, on this tight urban site, it allows you to not have blinds in your apartment, because it blocks people from seeing into your apartment. Again, a roof that can be many things, urban garden, hangout space. These were the numbers from our energy model. We were expecting to produce 20% more than what the residential portion of the building needed, which is what we were really going for, the net zero for the residential portion. And that's pretty much what happened. We generated 26,000 more kW than the residential needed, which got us almost to net zero for the entire building. We weren't trying to generate, this was not within the kind of net zero envelope, but we got really close to being net zero for the entire building. But the most interesting thing about this portion of it for me is that for the first time, I'm beginning to see utilities as a potential revenue stream. You know, it's not a cost, because after tenants pay a $40 a month fixed utility rate in this project, not 50 like the last one, 40, and we're generating all the energy for free. This actually is the first time we're seeing that we're generating $16,000 more per year. Now, that's not a lot, but it's something than we need. So is it possible? You can just imagine as solar panels become more efficient themselves, the metrics of utilities being something that we pay for is going to start to go away. Something that generates money. Anyway, the same prefabricated envelope system, again, built in half the time. Same idea, 1 meter in, 1 meter out, $40 a month fixed utility fees. In this case, I make this point because in a passive house building, unlike a typical code built building, ventilation is a really important piece of it. It's essential. You've got to have balanced ventilation and heating and cooling. So very often that means two distinct mechanical systems. And so what's beginning to happen is manufacturers are starting to merge those two systems, an ERV, energy recovery ventilator, and a heat pump. And in this particular case, this is what's called a packaged heat pump, which means that the condenser, which is typically that thing that sits on your roof or on the ground and it blows hot air, that's actually built into this unit. And so you don't run line sets to your roof. You don't have your roof filled with these condensers, which opens it up for solar and so forth. So we use this system here, this totally decentralized 1 unit per apartment, and it does heating, cooling, and dehumidification. And it fits nicely into the kind of the cabinetry of the kitchen, as you can see, with some storage below. And then I just wanted to mention, I don't want your eyes to glaze over here, but I did want to say something about the kind of attention we give these systems. So hot water is after heating and cooling. And when you solve heating and cooling with the envelope, right, you're essentially solving the issue of heating and cooling with the envelope. Hot water is the next biggest energy hog, especially in multifamily buildings, because of this very specific issue. Very often, hot water is a centralized system, meaning it's in one spot, whether in this case it's on the 3rd floor, very often it's in a basement, and it's a gas boiler, and then they send this loop of hot water around the building and into every single unit and then back. But of course, somebody up here or somebody down here, if they opened their faucet, it would take 5 minutes for the water to get hot, unless you did what's called a recirc loop. So this blue line is water that's constantly being pumped around the building so that the hot water stays really close to the fixture, right? That's a ton of energy that's being used. It's a second set of piping. It's a second layer of insulation and heat lost and the pump and all of that. And we thought, wait a second, we can rethink this. What if we start thinking about the hot water the way plumbing drainage system is thought about? And the essence of drainage and venting of sewage pipes is that you have this stack and then these very short horizontal runs to fixtures, right? Well, the exact same thing could happen with hot water, the exact same principle. If we decentralized it into these cores, ran one pipe up, just, that's a fraction of the length of piping that one would use in a central system. And then very short horizontal runs to the fixtures. That's the same principle as the venting, okay? And then the recirc loop, instead of typically a whole nother pipe would then come out, be insulated, and go down and connect back into the hot water heater. What if you put the recirculation line inside the supply line? Now, I get all freaked out by this because I think it's brilliant that somebody thought about this. And what this means ultimately is that the energy that is being lost in this system, which is an off-the-shelf system, is half that of what a typical system would. And it costs half to install because it's off-the-shelf heat pump water heaters. So these are the kind of innovations that get me really excited, because this is how, when people say, how can you possibly build a passive house at code built numbers? This is all little ideas like this add up a lot. All right, so here it is. I'm going to get moving because I think I'm rambling a bit. And here's how it fits perfectly into its neoclassical neighborhood. All right, and then the last one I'll show you is one of the first passive house projects we built. It's first affordable housing project. It was for formerly homeless families, large families, 5 bedrooms, handicap accessible ground floor, first certified passive house project in Pennsylvania. And it's really where we cut our teeth on all these issues that I've talked about. This is the first time that we did a modular project built to the passive house standard. It's where we developed the building system rather than a building typology to be reproduced. So our idea was that once we develop this building system, it can be replicated into various building types and sizes. It was our first shot at a passive house, and we hit the blower door test beautifully. And this is what it means to hit the blower door test in a passive house building, standing next to your neighbors. You could actually just warm up you could put your hands up against these buildings and kind of warm up. But, lots of natural light, simple materials, really terrific triple pane windows and doors we could only get in Europe at the time. Now you can get these, there are multiple manufacturers in the United States and Canada. And with 5 kW, it was designed to generate all the building needed. And at below $130 a square foot, again, this was affordable housing. So we just started to ask the question, why isn't affordable housing being built? If we could do this, other people can do this. And so we went to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. We didn't know much about how this stuff got funded. And we said, how about you just make all affordable housing capable of getting to net zero by 2030? Essentially saying, use passive house as the tool to get there. And they said yes. They said yes. And it's a long story. I won't go into it. But and then I said, how? And they said, through the LIHTC program, 9% low-income housing tax credit program. I'm not going to go into this other than to say it's an extremely competitive program, and that's very important. It's a point-based system, and the more points you get, the better chance you have of getting funded. Typically, you don't get funded for like 3 years. So really, really important that if you were to add an extra couple of 10 points, optional points here for passive house, maybe developers might be interested just by the fact that 10 points. Wow. If I don't take those points, somebody else might. And that's exactly what happened. In the first year, this is 2015, 85 projects came in. 38% of those projects came in as passive house projects. And this is from developers and architects that didn't know anything about passive house. They did it purely for the points. Okay. So they funded. They in the end, they only funded 7, but originally 8 of those projects were passive house projects. And here are the costs of all of the projects from that year. The white lines are the code built kind of everyday projects, and the yellow and orange are the passive house projects. And if you compare the passive house projects, the costs of the passive house projects to the code built projects, the passive house projects, which use 75 to 80% less energy than a code-built building were built for, were 2.5% more than the code-built buildings. The PHFA said 2.5%. You've got 5% contingencies in your budgets. You can do this within your contingencies. And they said, go. And so that's what they did. They funded these projects. They all got built. And then the question was, well, that was that application. Did they get built for what they said they were going to build them for? And the answer is yes. They built them within the contingencies that they had. These are the code-built buildings that at application were $171 a square foot. Use 3% of their contingency to complete them. Same thing, Passive House, 4%. But, you know, essentially, they got built for what they said they were going to be built for by developers, builders, and architects that had never done Passive House buildings before. Okay, and that's important to remember. So, you know, maybe that was a fluke. So the next year, 10 projects were awarded funding that were Passive House projects, and something happened. When you average the Passive House projects compared to the code-built buildings, it flipped. The Passive House projects were coming in on average 2% less than the code-built buildings. For me, it doesn't matter the 2% more or less. It's not the point. The takeaway here is, how is it possible that all of these developers and builders are doing this and they're building them within the realm of what code-built buildings are being built for? How is that possible? Here they all are. They're all built. The next year, same thing, 8 projects. Same exact thing happened. 2% less. Okay, so this is the last thing I'm going to show you, but I just think it's another helpful way to rethink the metrics of development and utilities and what matters. So this is one of the first 7 projects that were built. It's for veteran housing. This building on the right was a historic building that was kept, and they wrapped this 49-unit building around it, built to the Passive House standard, designed it as a prefabricated foundation system. This is a structural insulation that is also the formwork for the building. And then on top of that prefabricated foundation system is a prefabricated envelope system, the same exact thing that I showed you in the other projects, built in half the time. Contractor that had never done a Passive House building, never hit a blower door test that was anywhere close to Passive House, and he hit the blower. This is the pre-drywall blower door test. This is without even drywall, and he hit the Passive House standard. And then this is after drywall was done, hit the standard. But this is the most interesting piece of it for me, because in affordable housing, tenants pay 30% of their income, and that goes towards rent and utilities. Well, what happens when the utilities goes down? Does the rent go up? In fact, it does. So the developer, the owner said, listen, if you allow $103 a month for a 1-bedroom for utilities, what if I deliver it a unit that uses $42 a month? Can we use that extra $60 a month to go towards revenue? And turns out, yes, you can. And so why? Why would you do that? Well, one developer might put it in their pocket, but this nonprofit developer, he doesn't do that. He says that $300,000 that extra revenue can afford another $300,000 in debt. So I'm going to do that in order to build more housing. So what I love about him is Passive House lets you borrow, leverage more money to build more housing because of the utility mortgage relationship, right? And there it is. And there it is on opening day. And the last thing I want to tell you is this was a paragraph, people. We just asked the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency to put this paragraph into their QAP for 10 extra points. So why not ask other states? So to date, we've asked 40 states and 18 states, not you guys, 18 states have put Passive House into their QAP in one way or another. And projects are happening in those states. But even in the states where the QAP does not have Passive House in it, it's still happening. Why? Because it makes sense to build affordable housing to the Passive House standard. And here are some of those examples too. And just so you know, we have a conference every single year that is called the New Gravity Housing Conference, which is all about lessons learned on building affordable housing to the Passive House standard. Thank you. I don't know if I went on too long, probably.
No, you're right about on time. 3/4 of an hour is what we said.
Oh, great.
I'd like to open things up for comments and questions. While you're thinking, I just wanted to reinforce what Brett mentioned and what Missy and I discussed with Brett and Shannon, and that is that the intention is or the expectation will be that planning commissioners watch Brett's presentation. And I have been accumulating a list of people that I'm going to send the recording of this presentation to, who are interested in these topics, so that hopefully it is widely viewed and we dispel some of these paradigms that I mentioned when I framed this conversation. So Commissioner Kerber, fire away.
Great presentation and really exciting. My question is, the Inflation Reduction Act hits, and this is going to really change renewable energy. It's going to change transportation. It's going to help low-income people with their energy equity. It's so valuable, and everybody really needs to appreciate it and learn about it. And you, in what you do, I was really curious as to what you are thinking is going to impact what you do.
With the Inflation Reduction Act?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Other people have asked me that, and I haven't dug into what it will actually mean for the work that I do. And I think it's curious that I don't know, because we have never had subsidies to do what we do. We've always had to find ways of doing what we do with the money that we had. So I think it's fantastic that that we have needed that kind of investment in certainly solar, but also energy efficiency, and lots of other things associated with that. For generations, we've needed that, but I haven't had it. So I've had to just kind of figure it out without the subsidies. And so, Larry, I don't know. It's kind of like icing for me. You know, it'll make things easier. Life's not been easy, but maybe it'll make things easier. Maybe what it'll do, I think what I'm most excited about is it's about clients. It's about people saying, okay, we're going to do that. This is what I needed, developer or architect talking to me. This is what I need. I needed this in order to get us over the edge. So, okay, we'll do a Passive House project now. You know,
I guess what I was hoping to hear is that this is going to make those who follow on doing projects similar to yours all across the country, all across the world, maybe, to do it easier, of course, I hope, and do it more cost effectively.
I hope that. But I think what it'll do more than anything is set the tone for. See, I think it needs to happen on the not so much like on the individual level, yes, but it's got to happen on a systemic level. So I hope what it does is that it gets invested into policies within municipalities that push the very things that you guys were talking about earlier with Brett's presentation, that becomes a way of subsidizing some of that work that needs to be done. That's what I hope it does. I mean, I think it's going to get developers interested in building because there are subsidies for it, but to build to the Passive House standard. But ultimately, I think what I hope it does is it creates a systemic change. It's not going to last unless it does that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to go back and look at it again because there's just a lot to absorb there. But I'm curious. I mean, you obviously talked. You're demonstrating it can be done. You're demonstrating, the cost effectiveness of it. You're showing how it's been incentivized in affordable housing. Are there? That's not happened yet in Michigan. But in terms of, have you seen any other examples at the local level of ways to incentivize this beyond?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really great way to incentivize it from a zoning perspective. For example, in Philadelphia, on the one project that I showed you with the first project, the battery project with the green roof and the solar 10 feet above, we put a green roof on that. We were going to put a green roof on anyway, but at the time, Philadelphia changed their incentives, their sustainability incentives, and they gave us a density bonus if we put a green roof on the building. And I think that kind of strategy makes a ton of sense for energy efficiency too. What's the difference? Build a passive house building that is a certified passive house that hits the blower door test, and you'll get a 10% density bonus. That's one example.
Thanks.
Commissioner Calvin Garcia.
Oh, it's a terrific presentation. I'm just so excited to see this and really, really motivated. My question has to do with your slides 76 and 77, I believe, when you're talking about the distributed water heating systems.
Yeah.
And I'm just really, really curious to learn more about those. And I'm wondering if you have any resources that you can share with us about that. And then you're also talking about companies, local companies, that can source within the United States that are providing this technology. I'd love to see, who those manufacturers are that you're working with and that you've had really good success with. And you don't have to, go into too much detail during this meeting here. I understand, but it'd be really, really great.
Well, I'll tell you what, you can just email me. I think that's maybe the better way. I can give you a couple of manufacturers, and the most important person you need to know is a guy by the name of Gary Klein. He is known as the hot water guru of North America. He knows everything there is to know about hot water, and he is who I've been working with on these systems. But yeah, so just take my email down, and I'll send you the name of the manufacturers that we've been working with.
I'll send that to everybody. Gary has his own website, and Tim, you didn't mention that you have a YouTube video that basically goes into detail on this subject, so we can send that around.
Just another quick question. Do you integrate electric vehicle charging into your developments?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I was debating putting this in the presentation that I didn't have time, but in the battery project, it's called the battery because those 13 those 13 parking spaces have charging stations. But what we're really excited about is when bi-directional chargers start making sense, or start making sense. They make sense. They just don't exist commercially yet. But when they do, and I know people who know electric cars, you know, they just poo-poo this idea because of degrading the batteries and so forth. But put that out of your head for a second. Why not, again, with this idea of a good idea has to have at least two functions? If a car is going to take you around, that's one function. Well, why can't the car be the battery for the building that does, if nothing else, knocks your demand charge down to zero, because your demand charge is half your bill, and it's all based on pulling electricity off the grid at peak demand. Well, if instead of pulling it off the grid, you pull it from your car for a couple of hours, why can't we do that? So we haven't done it yet, Carlene. Wait, did you ask me that? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we haven't done it yet, but we have prepared ourselves for it. And I think the first bi-directional charger is coming out with the Ford Lightning truck, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Yeah, and that's not out yet.
Vehicle to grid, V to
Yep.
G. Yep. It's coming for sure.
Yeah.
So the battery had enough production to also accommodate the EV charging?
Well, theoretically, and if you've got 13 cars parked, we did the math where if you've got 13 cars parked, remember these have pretty large batteries in them. And I just got my first electric vehicle. It's got 130 kW battery in it. Others are like 60, right? So you gang 4 or 5 of them up. So that was the math. The math was at any given time, there's going to be 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot. And so if provided you design the software to pull from those vehicles whenever needed, but not pull too much to degrade the battery and so forth. But yes, this is a technology that can make a lot of sense. But I think the integration of building information and software to help run that whole interface smoothly isn't there yet.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. This is great. I look forward to interacting with you. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Others? I have a question, Tim. The city of Ann Arbor is looking at a lot of construction, housing construction of the type that you showed, 2 to maybe 6 stories. But also there's been quite a bit of construction, and more is likely in the downtown area, where we're talking about 12 stories, 17 stories, in some cases up to 20 stories. I think you showed a picture of a tall passive house construction. I know that there are passive houses that are, in the 20+ story range. Can you talk a little bit about that, either from personal experience or what you've learned from interfacing with other of your peers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so many different ways to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it from
maybe a question to ask is, do you think there's anything that you talked about tonight that were the conclusions that you've led us to would potentially be different conclusions for tall buildings?
No, in fact, what I was going to say was they'd only be better. for tall buildings because the fundamental premise, think of it this way. You build a little house, tiny little house, and you put it in the woods. You've got 6 sides to your tiny little house, right? The envelope for that tiny little house would have to be really thick in order to keep the heat, because you've got all these surfaces compared to the tiny volume leaking out heat all the time, right? Now, the other extreme is you've got a tower. And so the volume, the relative volume to surface area ratio is a totally different thing. And so guess what happens? The bigger the building, the thinner the wall gets, right? And what does that mean? That means the more cost effective it becomes. So that's really what I would say. Now, what it also does is it introduces another series of challenges, because all the projects that I showed you are wood construction. Okay. You get above 6 stories and you have to build with non-combustible construction. But I will just tell you that New York City is the center of passive house building right now. And there are large and small buildings every single day going up. Jonathan Rose is completing a 600 unit passive house project. I think it's in the Bronx. Right now, the tallest passive house building in the world is on Governor's Island in New York City. So anybody who wants to know how to build tall buildings to the passive house standard, look to New York City.
Right. I'm going to mention something that some people here may not be familiar with. You talked about the envelope being sealed, and you gave these ACH 50 figures. There's probably some people that aren't familiar with that terminology, so correct me if I'm wrong, but ACH means air changes per hour, and that is the 50 refers to a pressure differential that is set up so that you get consistent readings from case to case, and it happens to be 50 pascals. And as Tim showed multiple times, with these passive house projects, they're getting figures in the range of around 0.5 or so. The passive house standard is 0.6. I'm pretty sure in Michigan, code is an ACH 50 of 4. So that means, and Tim showed this many times with some of these thermal images, and that's really almost showing more the insulation, but what you don't necessarily see is the leakage as much. A passive house building is leaking less than 1/6 the amount of heated air that a code built building is. So that's just one more reason why these buildings make so much more sense. If you think of all of, it's one thing to have an all electric building, but if it's leaky as hell, then you're heating air or you're cooling air, and it's leaking out at 6.5 times the rate at a code built building that it is for a passive house building. So think about that. When you think about waste in wasting energy, that is a huge waste.
And I think about wasting money. And I do want to say this one thing I forgot to say, and that is that I'm a fan of what some of us have kind of dubbed stealth passive house. Now, why? Because if I were to go to my subcontractors, let's say my framer, and I were to say, okay, I want you to price my really unique and amazing and experimental project, passive house, a passive house project. I want you to give me a price on this. It's going to be complicated, air sealing details. And what do you think that guy's going to do? He's going to put a padding on every line item on that budget. Instead, I say to my framer, here are the drawings, give me a price to frame it. And the framer gives me a price. And I said, okay, you got the air barrier, you got the insulation, you got the WRB on the outside, and you got the windows, you got your triple payment. Yeah, got it all. I was like, okay, great. Now, what if so I have his number. And I said, okay, so what if that envelope showed up on site? You didn't have to put all those pieces together. He was like, really? Oh, I could do it in half the time. And I said, okay. So he knocked his number down. So you don't go into discussions with people about how wonderful, unique, and experimental this is. You go in saying how simple it is. It's actually really straightforward and simple. Because that is what changes the budget conversation, in my experience, more than anything else. I have seen teams just fall into the trap of talking too much about why this is so unique, and all of a sudden their numbers they can't cover they can't get there in their budgets. So that's just a cautionary tale.
Another question from anyone? So I'm going to take a stab at somewhat of a summary, and then turn it over to Tim and see if he has a summary, and then we'll move on with the rest of the meeting, which is basically just closing things out. So this is the Energy Commission, and we've been sort of focused on energy and greenhouse gas reductions, and affordability has also been a dominant theme of what we've talked about. But I want to mention again other benefits of this type of construction, because I think this is important for a lot of different stakeholders and constituencies in Ann Arbor. So again, highly energy efficient, lower greenhouse gases, reduce utility costs. But passive houses also have the following benefits. They are healthier because of the absence of natural gas combustion and better moisture protection and enhanced ventilation. They are more comfortable because there are less drafts and less radiant heat losses and gains. They are much quieter because the envelope is better sealed and it's better insulated. And we are doing a lot of construction in Ann Arbor on the downtown areas and on transit corridors. So if we want people to move to these places, having a quiet environment and not hearing all the city noise and things like that, that is really, really important. And then finally, these are more resilient buildings because in the case of a loss of power, think of the block of ice that Larry showed us in the summertime, or think of the reverse of that. In the wintertime, you lose power. These houses are a lot more resilient to being able to stay in your home and not have to go to a shelter or something like that. Granted, there's other considerations to doing that, but still, these houses are, have these types of construction have real advantages. And I want to sort of end my comments with talking about the village of Ann Arbor. So this decision is in front of council. And I've worked in business, I've worked in industry. I realize the train is, some might say, has left the station or is about to leave the station. But I want to emphasize that we have heard that the 320 garden apartments that are a part of this cannot be all electric because utility costs will be dramatically higher. And they cannot rent these apartments with these high utility costs. Well, guess what? We just heard from Tim with many examples, not just his own, but illustrated with his own examples and with data, that you can build these types of apartments at the same or maybe even lower cost. You can dramatically improve the energy efficiency and even reduce the utility costs. And these are the kinds of messages that we need to get across to developers, to architects, to these teams, that this is what we need in Ann Arbor. This is what we need across the country and across the globe. And the paradigm that we keep on getting repeated time and time again, that this can't be done sustainably and affordably, regardless of whether this is affordable housing, workforce housing, or market rate housing, simply needs to be challenged. And I believe it can be busted based on the kinds of stories and data that Tim has shared with us tonight. So, Tim, how would you like to wrap things up?
Well, I'm just thinking, about this group of people and the kind of scale of what you can affect. And it reminds me of what I've been really focused on for a number of years. And that is what I call looking for leverage points. And for me, that's what this LITEC program was all about. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I was getting a little exhausted, building one building at a time and then saying to the world, look, you can do it too. One building. I thought that one building could make a difference. And then I realized I'm going to die and this planet's nothing's going to change on this planet. I've got to think at a different scale here. And that's when I started thinking about affordable housing. And when the competitive nature of the QAP finally sunk in, and I realized, my God, that is so, it's like the secret sauce. It's a leverage point that, when I say leverage, I mean that one move could shift the industry, right? That one point of, it's an opportunity. You're not even forcing people to do it. You're just leveraging the competitive nature of those tax credits to ask them to push just a little bit. And I guess what I would leave you with is to search for those places of leverage. And leverage is all about the least amount of effort with the largest impact, right? That's why they're important. One person building one building isn't going to change the world, but one person affecting scale, change at scale, that's what I'm searching for. And for instance, if all you did at the municipal level was to slip in to the, I don't know, building code or an incentive for a developer to build a building that hits a blower door test of 0.6 ACH50. Boom. You don't say how much insulation you need to have. You don't say what the windows should be. You don't say it's got to be passive house. If all you did was say, hit a blower door test, that's going to resonate with a developer, because a developer is going to go, I don't like leaky buildings. I'll make my building tight. Well, guess what? That developer is going to realize very quickly your crappy double pane windows are actually leaky. So they might actually look to a better quality window, and so forth and so on. It will affect how, and it will not cost them a lot, but it will dramatically affect how they look at designing buildings. And the quality, they will see it immediately. They will see it immediately. So anyway, look for leverage points is what I would say.
Great guidance. And by the way, as far as paradigms, I admit I have my own paradigms and live by paradigms. So this is not to blame anybody. This is just, to Tim's point, we need to find these leverage points to pry open these paradigms that we all that we all live with or live and affected by. And just, I would like to wrap up. Ken Garber has shared some of this with us before. He called in earlier. Since the A20 plan was approved, if we include the 320 garden apartments at the village, 849 additional residential units are going in burning natural gas. So this is not just about passive houses. This is just, you know, the all electric portion of that. But you know, sometimes people are using, well, we have to burn natural gas in order to make this affordable, and we've sort of blown that out of the water. So 849 new residential units, 415,000 additional square feet of hotel space, and an additional 130,000 square feet of industrial space, all is burning natural gas. And that combined is going to basically offset all of the solar in the Solarize program that to date, all of the solar that's going to go on city buildings, and half of the solar that is going to go on the city's landfill project. So that's the consequence. So OSI is doing great things, but we need to find these leverage points to not permit that kind of development going forward. We really have to, if we're going to meet our net zero target in 2030, which is tough enough as it is. So,
well
Tim,
put.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We have an agenda item on here, which is something maybe we don't have to talk a whole lot about, because I think Tim gave us a lot of guidance, and we have some thinking to do based on what Brett presented to us, but we have an agenda item on here, and so I'll open it up for discussion. And that is on potential resolution from the Energy Commissions and our recommendations regarding sustainable buildings. So what we want to do is plant a seed that the Energy Commission, potentially on its own, potentially in collaboration with the Planning Commission, possibly with the endorsement of the Environmental Commission, think about these lessons learned from Tim, about other lessons learned that we can glean elsewhere, and put these into a resolution and serve our function as a commission, which is to advise City Council on policy. That is our role. And I think a resolution that takes some of these points is something that would do a lot of good and be an effective means of changing the conversation across the city, but particularly with decision makers in both the Planning Commission, because they are afforded decision-making authority in many cases, and then finally with City Council. So I'd like to open that up. Missy, I don't know if you want to comment any more on that, because this was sort of your idea of wrapping this up with this discussion, and then I'll open it up to everybody else. And Tim and everybody else, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim, and thanks, Chair Mirsky. Right, so you may remember at a previous commission meeting, we took a stance as a body on a particular development, and that is generally frowned upon in the process. We gave the petitioner no time to respond or take our feedback. And so instead of going on one-off recommendations on what we like and what we don't like, we've been asked if the commission has a stance as a whole, that we should present that stance through a resolution for council, for the Planning Commission, and for others to be able to point to and have consistency across all developments. So this was something we talked about post that particular discussion, and is an opportunity we certainly don't have to take, but it seems like we have interest as at least some individuals to have that discussion. And this is just the beginning of a potential resolution.
Would either of our council member liaisons like to weigh in on this? Go ahead, Councilmember Briggs.
I mean, I think this is really important. I think that especially working in collaboration with Planning Commission on this issue, it's having this a clear guidance to council about would be very helpful. And I think it's much more useful than going project by project.
Comments from anyone else? Councilmember Adina.
I don't have much more to add to that other than what Councilmember Briggs said, but just to concur, I think it's obviously helpful. I think it's the role of this body to provide that policy guidance, and I certainly agree to the extent that it helps kind of weighing in on individual projects and rather provides kind of a base level of guidance. I think that's helpful.
Right. Other comments, words of wisdom, questions? Councilmember Briggs again.
I guess just one final thought. It's great for the commission to be developing it. I would assume that it would be most productive to be done in consultation, very close consultation with staff in terms of recommendations that are easily implemented.
Agreed completely. And that staff includes not only OSI, but includes the planning commission or planning department, of course. Missy, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that last comment from Councilmember Briggs, and was thinking that the discussion would continue over potentially multiple meetings, but getting a sense for the kinds of things you would want to see, like encouraging south-facing roofs is one thing that Commissioner Kerber brought up. So I think we're in the very beginning of generating those kinds of ideas. So thematically, we can start putting them pen to paper and see what that actually looks like in practice. So I would say where I sort of saw the discussion tonight was nothing that we have to stick to, just be getting like what I heard, this seems interesting, and putting ideas forward.
In terms of process, I recognize we're going on 2.5 hours here. So what I ask everybody do is sleep over or before you go to sleep tonight. In either way, jot down your ideas, jot down some tonight, jot down some tomorrow, share those with Missy and me, or maybe you can actually share them with the whole commission, because that may, we have a group email address, so that, we can't do that. Yep, because good, thank you. Share them with me and Missy. Then we'll start to maybe put some talking points together that we can then use to approach planning commission and staff and leadership to start maybe thinking about whether or not we can put a skeleton around a resolution and then develop that over the coming weeks and possibly a couple of meetings. How does that sound? Thank you for the shaking of heads, Councilmember Briggs and Missy. Tim, thank you very much. We really, really appreciate it. By the way,
go, but,
Tim is going to be presenting
me,
to the 2030 district soon. So, and he presented once before, so he's been a great resource for us here in Ann Arbor, and we've learned a lot from him. Thanks
Good luck with all of this.
We want to see an Onion Flats building in Ann Arbor one of these days.
Oh, that'd be great. All right, see y'all.
Thanks. Okay, so let's ramp down the meeting here. We have reports, first of all, from OSI and then from commissioners and council members.
Yeah, never dull moment here at OSI. I would be remiss if I didn't start with, we're in the middle of the Plant Forward Challenge. So it's not too late to jump in. There is an event. If you just are Zoom hungry after this, you can jump over and join a discussion, but we're running a week-long challenge, a few hundred Ann Arborites that spans all kinds of things about plant-based diets, who's providing them, how you cook them, and we even have a little cheeky idea of working with some of our residents to create an A20 recipe book that highlights some of the great things that people can make. So please feel free to join in on that. We are also actively planning Green Fair for the fall, second time we're doing that. And we have a lot of really fun ideas to engage the community pretty actively in that space. So if you know of any organizations that want to come out, it's really focused on acting, what you can do, and getting residents avenues to take action in their lives or in their community broadly around sustainability. I want to share that at last council meeting, council did approve a contract with 5 Lakes Energy and their sub New Gen Strategies and Solutions to work on the energy options analysis, which is many things. There's a narrative right now that it's one thing, it's many things, looking at kind of all of the different pathways that we could pursue to achieve our goal, which is the council directive of 100% renewable energy powering our community. So we're really excited to see how that analysis moves forward, and we're just in internal contracting, so that work will start shortly. We are actively fundraising for Bryant. We just submitted a grant yesterday. Another grant goes in tomorrow, and then working on a large geothermal grant that's going in shortly. Still really focused on making that the first fully decarbonized neighborhood in America. And we just continue to get so much interest in that project. We need to land the dollars though to transition from planning, which is where we've been successful in fundraising, into actual implementation to see the full decarbonization happen in practice. There's a whole bunch of other things, but I think lastly, I'll just leave you with a reality that our office is down a third of our staff, or will be shortly. We had a retirement in the office, and 2 team members have been poached by private industry. Dang it! Which is going to continue to happen as the team is successful. People are going to get offers all the time. And we've been very lucky in holding on to folks, but I share that broadly to say, please send folks that you know to the city's website. We will have 2 openings available shortly. One is already closed. And also, thank you for your patience. Right now, our objective is not to let the glass ball drop, but all the others are going to have to bounce for a little while we work on capacity.
Thanks, Missy. Council members.
Yeah, I can. The really big one is at the last council meeting, council approved the feasibility study for the municipal energy utility and sustainable energy utility side by side. And so we are moving forward with that, thanks to Missy and her team for all of the work that went into that process. Because my mind has been wrapped up in Renters Commission recently, our new Renters Commission has taken off and gotten to work. They, I believe, have had two regular meetings, but actually have met 4 or 5 times already because of special sessions to get themselves up and running. I bring this up because they have a long list of items that are priorities for them, but as this body continues to think about ways to collaborate with other commissions and boards, if there are things in particular that you think rise to the level of interest for the Renters Commission, I am sure they would be happy to talk to you and add those things to their list of priorities, ongoing priorities. And then this is also just kind of tangentially related, but I think I saw it today that the city is also looking for folks who use the city website for information on trash, recycling, and compost to participate in an interview. I don't have much more details other than that, but I believe I saw it posted on the city social media. So if you fall into that category and would be willing to give some time, I think they are looking for folks.
Commissioners, any news or updates to share? I'll just say briefly, as liaison to the Environmental Commission, the last meeting was dedicated to water quality issues, particularly related to the Gelman 1,4-dioxane plume, and then most recently the release of hexavalent chrome from Tribar Industries up in Wixom, and previous releases that they have had of PFAS and PFOS chemicals. So not really directly related to anything that we're doing, but it was an interesting meeting with some really good background information. So you might want to listen to that if you're interested, or take a look at the slides. Anything else? Any work group updates? So that takes us back then to our last group of public comments and public input. So this is an opportunity again for members of the public to provide up to 3 minutes of comments. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-8255. 0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also on the agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number in order to electronically raise your hand. To indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background noise. And then finally, state your name and your address at the beginning of your comments. Wait about 30 seconds. Next point on the agenda is items for the next agenda. So start thinking about that. We're going to wait, Alex, just a few more seconds, see if we got calls coming in, and then you'll be first up. So
okay, there we go. I see one hand raised.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. Caller ending in 010.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Wayne Appleyard, former 26-year member of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. I was involved with the 2012 Climate Action Plan, which was 10 years ago, and have been following everything ever since. I want to first congratulate Ken Garber on continuing to try and push things forward and illuminating how poorly we actually are doing with getting off of fossil fuels. And I'd also like to thank Tim McDonald for all of his work and his excellent presentation. He's doing wonderful things, and we should be copying those there. Somehow, I don't think people are getting it. We have a climate emergency. And in an emergency, you have to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do. Bob Berkebile just got he's an architect well known who's involved with a lot of the early work with getting the AIA involved with energy work. And he recently received their Kemper Award, which is the highest award you can receive at the AIA. And when he was interviewed, he basically talked about how if you look at the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, we're not talking about 10 years ago, 10 years to fix things. We're not talking about a couple of years. And so we really need to assume that this is an emergency. And I'm going to suggest something really radical, that the city propose no new gas hookups. Basically say we have to electrify all new buildings. And yeah, it's going to mean that some developers go away. It's going to mean that some developers may try and sue you. But, you know, health, safety, and welfare is what the city's supposed to be all about. And what's worse than climate change, as far as that's concerned? So realistically, it would probably take them a couple of years to go through the courts to combat this. In the meantime, you've done something. Otherwise, it's just going to continue as usual. You know, yeah, you know, Brett talked about it being a challenge. It's not a challenge, it's an emergency. So we really have to think out of the box and say no to combustion and look holistically at reducing not only the carbon footprint of new buildings as far as what they're going to consume after they're built, but also what they consume or what they produce in embodied energy during their
30
construction.
seconds.
So we should be looking. Pardon? Okay.
30 seconds, Wayne.
That's enough.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Wayne.
That's
Anyone
all,
else,
Chair
Missy?
Murphy. No, that's
Oh,
all.
okay. Very good. So moving on to agenda items for the next meeting. Alex, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like the topic of hydropower restoration at Geddes and Argo dams to be included in the next agenda. It's like this kind of project could provide reliable and renewable energy for the proposed SEU. And recently, the Inflation Reduction Act also extended the renewable energy tax credits available for new and expanded hydropower generation on existing dams for projects that begin before 2025. And I know that in 2008, there was a study into hydropower restoration, and I think we could maybe use a new one to evaluate the current level of feasibility.
Great suggestion. I don't know if we'll do it in the next meeting, but certainly it's important that we take it up. And as you point out, it would be a great base load for city of Ann Arbor. So that's something. Anybody else have any other ideas that you'd like us to consider for future agenda items?
Chairman, can I ask a clarification? Is it what we already have for hydro? Are you proposing we look at expanding that hydro?
Well, we have, go ahead, Alex, do you want to comment or?
Yeah, Argos and Geddes dams don't have hydropower right now. They used to, and I'd like us to look into reintroducing hydropower and the feasibility.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have 4 dams, 2 of them have power and 2 don't.
Alex,
and maybe there's an option. There's an opportunity to upgrade the capacity or the efficiency of the generation that we currently have. So any other ideas? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner McComber.
Did we queue up next steps for talking about how we could do something like the passive house planning that the presentation was about?
So that idea is something that Missy and I are going to talk with Shannon and Brett about to see how we collaborate, when we collaborate. Do we have a joint meeting? Do we, as I mentioned before, work a little bit on the resolution and put together a skeleton of that where ideas from all of you would be appreciated, or anybody else that's been listening in. Yeah, that will be definitely something that we will either address in the next meeting or in a coming meeting as appropriate, based on what we ascertain here and do in the next couple of weeks. Councilmember Briggs.
Just knowing how difficult it is to join commissions for joint meetings and talk about kind of this, and maybe obviously this is a recording. I think hopefully Brett can share that with all the planning commissioners and encourage folks to watch that presentation, and then maybe they can have it as a discussion item on their agenda as something to, how they would like to work with Energy Commission on an idea like this. I mean, I think that might be, if there's a need to come to a joint commission meeting, that's great, but there may be opportunities to move it forward more quickly if we don't wait on that.
Right. Anything else? So just before we adjourn, I want to recognize 2 things. I want to remind everyone that the climate millage is going to be on the ballot on November 8th. And I would encourage all of us to do what we can to advocate and support that. There's a website. I don't have it off the top of my head. Missy, maybe, we had a presentation, I think, from Jason Frenzel, if I'm not mistaken. I wanted to encourage you to get the word out and to encourage others to hopefully vote for and support the millage so that we have the resources to be able to enact a plan. A plan without resources is, we know, is really not going to be successful. So it's really important. And the other thing I want to do is acknowledge Missy tonight. And we know she's great and she always multitasks, but she's also a single parent tonight. She's taking care of her child. She's taking care of dinner. She's administering this meeting. So thanks, Missy, for doing a great job again in so many different ways that we don't see it. So with all that said, thanks for everybody's participation tonight. It is 8:42 and this meeting is now adjourned. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks.
Right.